I have a funny story about him. Well, not that rings true to me too, but it's harder to do nowadays with employers, because people in those days used to take your word for it. If you told them you were a certain age, they wouldn't ask for a driver's license or a passport. But when he moved to Los Angeles, he was 65. Or at least when he applied for the job with the LA, whatever the job was, employment agency that he worked trying to find jobs for people for the city of Los Angeles. So he went in there and he was actually 65. And the mandatory retirement age at that point was 65. But because he looked so young, he told them he was 55. And nobody questioned it. So he worked for them for 10 years. And he had to retire because he was 65, but he was really 75. And everybody was saying to him, "We can't believe you're 65." And he told me, he says, "I wish I had told him I was 50."
Yeah.
Because he didn't want to retire.
Yeah.
But he was the mandatory retirement age was 65, even though he was 75.
Yeah, yeah.
And he said, "I wish I had told him I was 50, not 55."
Well, I think that runs in our whole family, because I remember when Nana attended something at high school when I was there, and people thought she was my sister, because she looked so young. And people say to me today when I tell them I'm 94, they say, "You don't look 94, you must be whatever." Anyway, so I think that goes with the Pick heritage or whatever.
I think you're right.
You're getting quite an education on this family that you've got out.
There was one story that you told us before, and I thought maybe you could retell it again for brothers of mine who haven't heard it, that you spent time in Cuba. Could you tell us when that was and how it came about?
How you made your hejera out of New York? What got you to Miami to begin with?
Oh, I wasn't very happy, but Nan and I were never getting along. And there was some gal that I had been working with, and she and her parents were driving to Florida. And I don't know if I asked if I could go, or she asked if I wanted to go. But anyway, I just decided I'd go with them. Clear out of New York. And I got a job on the way down. My purse was stolen, so I arrived in Miami with no money. But I had enough sense to go to, I forget, some agency. And I said, I don't have, and my purse was stolen, I don't have any money. I guess it was the YWCA. I said, "Will you put me up for the night? I'll wire home for some money." And I didn't wire home, I wired to some friends of mine. And they all sent, I think 3 or 4 of them sent me $10, and that was enough. And then I got a job in a resort hotel that included room and board. So that was fine, took solved that problem. And I worked there for that season from, I don't know, something like November to March or April, like that time.
The winter season, the big tourist season.
Yeah, yeah. And at that time, the hotels closed in April, I think. Nobody came down. And then, of course, little by little, they extended to May, and then they stayed open the whole year. But I wasn't working in the hotel. I was working somewhere else. And it was a gal that I became friends with. And she was complaining about the job being so boring. And I don't remember what I was doing, but it was boring too. And I said, "Well, why don't we check it and go to Cuba and get jobs? We're only 90 miles from Havana." And she said, "Can you get jobs?" I said, "Sure, why not?" So
What was the political situation in Cuba in those days? This was before Batista, correct?
this was before Castro. Yeah.
Well, I'm saying Batista was before
Trying to-
Castro.
Trying to think what his name was.
So this predated Batista.
Batista.
It was Batista, okay.
It was Batista, yeah. So she said, you know, how do you know you get a job? I said, of course you can get a job. No problem. You qualify. So she didn't know what to do, so she said, all right. So we bought tickets to Havana, and we got on an afternoon plane where they greeted you on arrival with Cuba Libres. See how welcoming it is?
Were those drinks?
Yeah. And so the next day we went to the American Embassy and applied for jobs and got it. And there was a boarding house that was run by a British woman, and everybody who lived there worked either for the British Embassy or for the American Embassy, a British legation, the American Embassy.
So this would have been just after World War II. This would have been the late 40s, huh?
I don't remember.
How old were you? Were you 23, 24?
Early 20s, I don't know.
Then it might have been during World War II.
I really don't remember.
Sure, it was. It was during World War II.
Anyway,
Was life good in Cuba in those days?
it was very pleasant for something like $5 a year. You could belong to some
Country club type of
some
thing?
country club, yeah.
With only expats?
And
Only Brits and Americans or something like that?
yeah. As a matter of fact, that's the thing that made me very cynical about American foreign policy, because the American ambassador, as I recall, didn't speak Spanish. And neither did most of the people that worked for the embassy. And they all belonged to the country club. And so the only people that the ambassador really knew personally were people who belonged to the country club. And so it didn't take me long to figure out if the United States is getting its information about what's going on in Cuba from the American ambassador, and he's only mingling with people who are the members of the Yacht Country Club.
Of course.
You know, then our foreign policy is way off base.
Of course.
But you know, part of it has to do with American ethnocentrism, that, you know, whatever we do, it's because we're Americans and we're so gifted and we're so smart, and we're the leaders of the free world. You know, all of this is such malarkey, but people believe it. Anyway, I remember thinking, you know, this is why our foreign policy is so unrealistic, because Washington's getting its information from the ambassador, and the only Cubans he talks to are members of the Yacht and Country Club, so he
Are
doesn't
the
know what
wealthy
the hell
people
is
who are,
going on.
the wealthy folk that are going to tell them everything's just great
That's
in
right,
Cuba?
sure.
And for how long were you there?
I was only there for 6 months because the gal that I went down with, we were living in this boarding house for employees of the American Embassy and the British Legation. And she fell in love with a guy that was there belonging to the British Legation. And so after 6 months, they took off to get married and they disappeared. And then here I am, like, alone in Cuba, and what the hell am I doing here? And in the meantime, I'm getting all these letters from Joe Weitzel saying he misses me so much, and why don't I come back, and when do we get married, and okay.
So that would have been your first time outside American soil?
Yeah.
Recount the story about looking for jobs and how discouraged you got and how Pappy was so affirming.
Oh, that was when I was still in New York. I remember coming home one day and saying, nobody wants to hire me. I'm not old enough. I don't have enough experience. I'm not pretty enough. And he said, you're telling me all the reasons why somebody shouldn't hire you if you go in with that kind of an attitude. You want to go in with the idea that if they don't hire you, they don't know what they're missing. okay.
And you never had trouble getting a job after that?
No, I got a job 2 or 3 days after that. And it's interesting because the guy asked me only 3 questions. Where I lived, how long it took me to get into Manhattan, and could I do everything? And because I had my father's image in my head, I said yes. So the next day, when I got in there, was the first day. It was
You were on the telephone switchboard or
there was
something,
a
isn't that what
telephone
happened?
switchboard, a kind that I had never seen before. I didn't have the slightest idea how to make it stop or start or anything. And so
Those were real complicated. To put phones, in
That's
those
right.
days you had to take all the plugs out and
That's right.
put them into
So
the wall, into the
the
various...
phone's ringing and I don't know how to make it stop or answer it or anything. And meantime, the boss is standing behind me like this, you know, and I'm thinking, you know. So he answered the phone, took the message, and then he said to me, I thought you told me you could do everything. And I thought of my father and I said I did, but I didn't say I could do everything the first day.
That's a great answer, actually.
So he liked that. So we
That was a great answer. I think Caleb also really loves the story that you told about Pappy and the pencil, why they created pencils.
I used to tell other people that, but I've forgotten how it goes.
Well, it was something about making mistakes in life, right, and being a perfectionist, and Pappy saying that there's a reason that they created pencils was because people make mistakes, and that's why
Oh, it
there
had to do with
erasers.
had to do with the races.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that when I said, you know, I made such a bad mistake, he said they couldn't put erasers on pencils. But millions of people didn't make mistakes every day.
It's a great line.
And I thought, oh, hey, that's nice.
He was a font of wisdom. In a lot of ways, he reminds me of one of the ancient Greeks.
Well, he was a real philosopher, yeah. I feel very lucky to have had him as a major influence in my life.
What were your memories of my family when you were growing up? What was your perception of us, Dad, Mom, me, Jeff, maybe Jenny, if you remembered her at all? What was your perception of us when you look back? What comes to mind?
Right now, I can't even think of who your parents were.
Well, that would be your brother Harlan and my mother Joni.
Okay.
You said that you felt they were mismated, that they were not.
Oh, I did. Oh, I did. Right from the very beginning, I felt that. I think Harlan wanted what almost every man is said to want. What do they call it? A cook in the kitchen, a diplomat in the dining room, and a whore in bed. That's, anyway. And Joni was none of those. So your father did a lot of bed hopping himself.
Did you like my mother? What were
Yeah.
your feelings about her as you knew her as a young lady?
Oh, I liked her very much. I felt sorry for her because I felt that she hadn't had any kind of happy childhood, and I had met her mother a couple of times, and she seemed to me to be way out of it.
How would you have met her? Did she come out from Chicago? Because her mother was a recluse. At least in the last 20 years of her life, she never went out of her bedroom with all the shades drawn. She was a little bit whacked at the end there.
No, I met her before that stage. I met her twice. But, and Joni's father seemed to me to be pretty strict. But I always liked Joni. Even though I never thought that she and Colin were any kind of a match.